Wonderful. Right, so to start off, I realised I very helpfully put on the notes that went out about 12 dimensions of zero trust, and then forgot to mention that based on a paper that I wrote about 3 years ago. We didn't publish. That may have confused a lot of people, so I apologise in advance. But effectively, when you start to look at the zero trust solution, that covers the actual human person user, their identity, which theoretically links you back to the original user. That doesn't always do that. The device, the network or connectivity in broad terms. You start with the host, the application, the data, and then the monitoring of those. We tend to separate application and data because whilst they do go together, the difference between actually consuming an application, using the user interface, and API style access tends to apply very different rules. And in a zero trust model, the lack of context or the change in context around that is absolutely fundamental. And then you go on to 4 really interesting states that people don't tend to talk about too much. So the first is session state management, which if you're running zero trust policy access is absolutely fundamental and very few people know where it actually exists in their systems. And then you come on to some really interesting elements around location and time, which is generally very impactful for user behaviour monitoring and how people should be utilising the system. And then lastly, policy. And it's all around policy, which are around the rules of access and those things that organisations have set. So that gives you 12 overarching dimensions of things that you can influence, can control, and certainly need to keep track of. The challenge a lot of organisations have is that trying to track and manage and manipulate all 12 of those things is horrifically complex and large scale, so if you're introducing it into a legacy systems environment. And that has certainly prevented a lot of organisations that I've worked with and been part of in terms of starting to adopt that, when actually the barrier to entry might not be quite that high. So, to open to our panel, do you think you need to address all of the dimensions? And if not, where would you start? James, I'll pick on.
Thanks, Johnny. So, yes, absolutely. No. We always say it's a bit of a trope that zero trust is a journey, not a destination, and actually a lot of the principles of zero trust are common sense and things that people are doing habitually anyway. And if you think about physical access, we've applied the principles of zero trust for a long time anyway. We do not give access until identity and trust is proven. It's really taking that basic stance on security and applying that to the data world. So, in old parlance, we would give access to the network, and then we would use access control lists or policy enforcement points to decide whether or not you should be able to get to something. All zero trust is really doing is taking the other way around, taking it the other way around. So we're looking at who you are, how you're authenticated, what your device looks like, what devices, what the security is on that device, your overall security stance, and then based on that, we're making decisions as to whether or not you should have access and what you should have access to, based on that, that premise of identity, security stance, and any other variables that you might want to include in that. And the last thing you do is build the network for that user. So the last thing you do is actually create the rules that relate to that user for what they need access to. So it's actually quite easy to do a lot of that with what you already have.
Okay.